This is a video record of our trip to Oahu in 2018 with our friends Mike and Fran Reid. This trip started on the morning of Monday, April 23rd. Our son Clark dropped us off at the Hawaiian Air Terminal at LAX. I had booked a flight on Hawaiian Air mostly because they offered pairs of seats on either side of the cabin instead of the more common 3-seat rows used on most other airlines. I had booked economy seats assuming that the seating arrangement would make the reduced legroom bearable. It did not. Right after we arrived in Oahu, I called and upgraded our seats for the return flight. We left at 10 o'clock in the morning. The flight took less than 5 hours, arriving in Oahu at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. As always, we flew past Waikiki on our approach to the airport. We were able to see the Royal Hawaiian Hotel, the Sheraton Waikiki, and our hotel, the Imperial. After we collected our luggage, we caught the shuttle to the Alamo Car Rental Agency. I had booked a Mustang convertible like the one in this picture, but one look at the back seat and we knew that we needed a bigger car. I quickly found an agent and she put us into this Honda Accord, which turned out to be a perfect car for the four of us. Just as we arrived at the Imperial Hotel, we saw Mike and Fran walking back to the hotel from getting lunch. They told us to drive under the gold letters Imperial name and stop at the end of the corridor. The hotel uses valet parking, so we never had to bother with parking or retrieving the car. Our room was sensational. It had a living room with a kitchenette, pull-down Murphy bed, and a separate bedroom. From our room, you could see down to this group of shops and restaurants that we passed many times on our walks to the center of Waikiki. After we got settled in our room, we drove with Mike and Fran to the local Costco store. We wanted to buy some things we knew we would need, like breakfast food, pog, wine, snacks, and a beach umbrella. Later that day, we walked to the Hilton Hawaiian Village. Mike and Fran took us to a little delicatessen in the village called CJ's. After dinner, we walked back to the Imperial to unpack and freshen up. Later that night, the four of us walked to the new International Marketplace, which is a very upscale outdoor shopping complex with shops and restaurants. We all marveled at the changes from the old International Marketplace. We returned to the hotel and went up to the top floor, which has a large room with a TV and DVD. This was where the week-long Norm's Classic Movies Festival was held. These movies included A Family Thing, Draft Day, The Majestic, Warm Springs, and Talk of the Town. The next morning, Tuesday, April 24th, we met downstairs for breakfast in the hotel restaurant, which is a Denny's coffee house. After that, we got our car and set out for the day's adventure. We left Waikiki and drove northeast to a place called Byodu Inn, which is a Japanese Buddhist temple. It is located at the far end of a beautiful cemetery. It started to look like it might rain at any moment, but we all had a positive attitude. Even under gloomy skies, the temple is breathtakingly beautiful. People are free to ring this bell for luck. It can be heard all over the grounds of the temple and cemetery. After about a half an hour, the rain that we knew was coming started. We waited in one of the alcoves until it stopped. We next drove to the North Shore and stopped at Sunset Beach, one of 3 beaches on the North Shore used to surf the giant waves that hit Sunset in the winter. We were disappointed to find the same gloomy clouds over the North Shore that we had seen earlier. We had hoped for blue skies and sunshine. We left Sunset Beach and drove next to Waimea Beach, the most famous of the surf beaches on Oahu. During the winter, the waves here can get as high as 50 feet or more. At other times, this is just a regular beach. Our next stop was at Laniakea Beach, aka Turtle Beach. We had hoped to see a giant sea turtle at this stop, and we were not disappointed. All sea turtles are protected by federal and state law, which requires that people stay at least 10 feet from any sea turtle. Usually there is a wildlife official present to ensure that people do not get near any turtle. I don't know if Mike or Fran had ever seen a sea turtle up close, but they really seemed to enjoy seeing this one. At this point it was getting close to noon, so we stopped at a brand new restaurant called the Beach House. Like most restaurants on the North Shore, there are no exterior walls, which really adds to the ambiance. The food wasn't bad either. Some of us ordered something odd. Some of us ordered something healthy. And some of us just ordered something that tastes good. After lunch, we drove a couple of blocks further and stopped at Matsumoto's Shave Ice. By the way, they use the word shave and not shaved. They have really expanded over the years. They used to just sell shave ice. None of us ordered shave ice, but it was really great to finally see some sun. After Matsumoto, we started heading south towards Waikiki. Our next stop was at the Dole Plantation. Dole used to raise pineapples on most of the North Shore, but that stopped years ago. Now this is just a tourist stop. We looked around in the store, bought a round of drinks, and went outside to soak up the flora. On our drive back to Waikiki, we saw a rainbow, our first on this trip. We arrived back in Waikiki at around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. As it turns out, the ABC store on the bottom floor of the hotel had an actual deli, so we decided to buy sandwiches, chips, and drinks there. We took the food up to the top floor of the hotel and dined there. After that, we watched another installment from the NCM Film Festival. The next day, April 25th, was the first and only day during the entire trip with blue skies and warm temperatures. After breakfast, we all drove to the weekly swap meet they hold in the parking lot surrounding the Aloha Stadium in Honolulu. We had heard that it was a must for bargains, but we did not find much to buy. Mike found a pair of sandals, and Robin found a glass sea turtle to add to her turtle collection. We had lunch at this McDonald's down the street from the swap meet, and then we left for the surprise destination I had been promising to show Mike, Fran, and Robin since we arrived. To reach this destination, we had to drive into the hills north of Honolulu over a really windy stretch of road. After a few wrong turns, we finally arrived at Pu'u'ulakaha, a place that very few tourists have ever heard about, let alone gone to. We parked, then we walked down this long path to reach the best view of Waikiki and Honolulu that is possible to get. The view was spectacular, and so was the weather. The brown flat area to the left of center in this picture is the Honolulu International Airport, and just beyond that, but not visible, is Pearl Harbor. After we all took one final look at the view, we drove back to the hotel and rested up. Later, we met back up and walked over to Robin's and my favorite restaurant in Oahu, Duke's. After a fantastic dinner, we left Duke's and walked out to the beach. We were all in the mood for ice cream, so we slowly started walking towards the Hilton Hawaiian Village. Inside the village is a place where they sell the best ice cream in Hawaii, Lappert's. After picking out on ice cream, we walked around the village, then returned to the hotel for the next installment of Norm's Classic Movies, or as it's known locally, NCM. The next day, April 26th, started out gray and overcast, quite a contrast to the day before. Our plan today was to hit as many of the beaches on the east side of the island as possible and hopefully get in some swimming and sunbathing. We left Waikiki and drove east to our first stop, the Halona Blowhole. A blowhole occurs when waves force ocean water through one end of a hole in lava and out the other end. The area around the blowhole was mostly lava. We next traveled to Waimanalo Beach. We were disappointed that the weather was still cold, windy, and overcast. While we were there, a Japanese wedding party came onto the beach. This was a photo shoot, not the actual wedding. From Waimanalo Beach, we next drove to Kailua Beach, which is rated as one of the most beautiful beaches on Oahu. This is really a beach park with trees and barbecue areas, which would have made this the perfect place to spend the day. But again, the weather was not cooperating. We figured that the wind must blow here regularly because of the number of wind and kite surfers. After Kailua, we decided that the weather was not going to improve, so we decided to cut short our plans to see the other beaches and started driving back to Waikiki. After lunch, Mike and I decided to go see Fort DeRussy, which is the Pacific U.S. Army Museum. It was a short 5-minute walk from the hotel, and that allowed Robin and Fran to go off and do some shopping. At sunset, we joined back up and walked again to the Hilton Hawaiian Village. By now, the weather around Waikiki was very pleasant, and the sunset was exceptional. We walked around the beach until it started to get dark. Then we walked back to the hotel. We returned again to the top floor of the hotel, and Mike bought a round of drinks. We stayed there until it got dark, then we returned to our movie room and to Norm's Classic Movie for that night. The next day was Friday, April 27th. Our plans for this day were to explore as much of the west side of Oahu as possible. We started by driving to the Disney Hotel Aulani. We did not go into the hotel, but at least Mike and Fran got to see what it looked like. we left Aulani and drove north to Kalani'anaole Beach Park. This was the biggest beach park we saw on this trip. For whatever reason, the west coast of Oahu has yet to attract any more than a few tourists, which usually leaves the beaches there virtually empty. Starting with this beach park, the beaches all the way up the west coast of Oahu had a backdrop of picturesque green rolling hills like these, quite a departure from the east coast. A few minutes after we left Kalani'anaole Beach Park, we saw a McDonald's restaurant, so we stopped to have lunch. I'll bet anything we were the only tourists to stop by there that day. After lunch, we continued on our journey. Our next stop was Mauna Lahi Beach Park. From the park, we could see one of the few hotels along Oahu's west coast, the Hawaiian Princess Resort. Like the day before, the weather was less than perfect. A short drive further brought us to Makaka Beach. As it turns out, this was a fun place because we could watch local surfers ride the biggest waves we had seen on this trip. The surfers were pretty good, but we saw quite a few wipeouts too. At one point, I wondered if Mike secretly wished that he could be out there surfing, but I never found out. Our next stop was Kiawaula Beach. This is literally as far up the west coast of Oahu as you can drive. This was by far the most deserted beach we visited on that day, partly because of the location and partly because no one lives anywhere near this beach. As we started back down the coast, we saw several green valleys like this one. As I was driving, I wondered if the west coast would ever become a popular destination for tourists and whether places like Kiawaula Beach would ever see a hotel or condominium. As we headed south, we tried to see places on the coast we had missed on the drive up. The first place we stopped at was Kaniana Cave, just a few feet from the highway. Fran and I walked over to see the cave up close, but it was not very deep and we were afraid there might be some bats, so we did not venture very far into the cave. Our next stop was at Maili Beach Park. The dominant landmark there was this hemispheric hill of lava. It almost looked man-made. The beach itself was nothing special, but I knew it would have a totally different look if the sun were shining. There was nothing more to see on the west coast, so we drove back to Waikiki. Everyone rested up, and later we met to have dinner. That night, we joined many of the hotel guests on the top floor of the hotel to watch the weekly fireworks put on by the Hilton Hawaiian Village. The fireworks were quite good, considering that this is a weekly event. Saturday, April 28th was the day that Fran's parents, brother, and his wife came to visit. To celebrate, Mike took all of us to Duke's for breakfast. After we ate, Mike, Fran, and her family went back to the hotel, and Robin and I walked out to the beach in front of Duke's. After that, we walked down to the end of Waikiki and were surprised to see a series of volleyball tournaments taking place right on the beach. There was a pier next to the tournament. Whenever we're in Waikiki, Robin and I like to walk out to the end of that pier, which has one of the best views of Waikiki. That afternoon, we all met on the roof of the Hilton Hakulani, the hotel where Fran's parents and brother were staying. Later that night, we all went to the annual Spam Jam, which is kind of like a street party celebrating Spam. They had closed the main street which runs down the middle of Waikiki called Kalakaua Avenue. By coincidence, there was a full moon that night. The next morning, Sunday, April 29th, we dropped Robin at the Ala Moana Shopping Center, and Mike, Fran's father Terry, and I went to the Pacific Aviation Museum. On the way there, I stopped at the Costco to return the beach umbrella that we never had a chance to use. The Aviation Museum is located on Ford Island in the middle of Pearl Harbor. It is located in two old hangars. We went first to Hangar 37, where they have a replica of one of the Doolittle bombers from 30 Seconds Over Tokyo. They also had a Japanese Zero. Hangar 79 contained a larger number of airplanes, including a Flying Tiger. The most interesting exhibit is new to the museum. It seems that a B-17 bomber crash-landed in a New Guinea swamp in 1943. It sat there for 63 years until a group of aviation enthusiasts went there, disassembled the plane, and brought it out in pieces. They then shipped the plane to the Pacific Museum, where it is now on display. A few months before we arrived, they moved the bomber into Hangar 79 to help preserve it. On the way back to pick up Robin, traffic and some wrong turns delayed getting to the mall entrance we had planned to pick her up. As a result, we were late and Robin was miffed, but all was forgotten. Later that afternoon, Mike, Fran, Robin, and I walked from our hotel to meet Fran's family at their hotel. We went up to the roof and had drinks. Then we walked to Benihana's at the Hilton Hawaiian Village for dinner.
You should incorporate this into your Tim Hortons. I'd have to drink a lot of coffee. And now more than I already did. Right. And now sit and watch them bake. Right. Oh, nice smell. Nobody kissed each other tonight. My wife's cold just went away.
I call the next segment, The Many Faces of Mike Reid. Monday, April 30th was our last full day in Oahu. During the week, we had noticed a long line of people waiting to have breakfast at a place called Eggs and Things in Waikiki, so we decided to go there and try it. We had to wait outside for a half an hour and were starving by the time we got seated. The food looked good, but it was average at best and definitely not worth the wait. The weather that day was gorgeous. We had nothing special planned, so we just bummed around Waikiki. We stopped at the McDonald's we used to frequent and noticed that they had torn out a wall to add a small patio. We walked down to the Royal Hawaiian Hotel and looked around there. Just after we got there, we saw the start of a wedding that took place outside by the beach. After lunch, we decided to go to the factory that makes Jam's World clothing in Honolulu. We told Mike and Fran we would see them later and set off. On the way, we passed the pier at which we docked with the kids the previous January. We found the Jams World store, but it was in a really seedy part of town. Robin bought a few items of clothing, then we returned to the hotel. That night we met Mike, Fran, and her family again on the rooftop of their hotel. Apparently, the hotel shows recent movies for its guests every night on the rooftop. I forget the name of the movie, but none of us liked it, so we all went back to the Imperial and watched the final installment of the NCM Movie Festival. Then it was Tuesday, May 1st. Time to go home. We had a final breakfast with Mike and Fran, then we drove back to Alamo to drop off the car and took the shuttle to the airport. When we got on the plane, we were both relieved that I had upgraded our seats after we arrived the week before. The weather was again overcast and gloomy, matching Robin and my feeling about leaving Oahu and Mike and Fran. We took off at 2:40 and once again got a spectacular view of Waikiki from above. The flight home took about 5.5 hours, arriving at LAX around 11 o'clock that night. As always, we were happy to get back home, but sad that our time with Mike and Fran was over. Until the next time.